Yes, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. What a pleasure to be here. And I couldn't think of a better place than this Agora here, this marketplace, to debate the topic. Well, I think at the very beginning it's necessary to take a short look back about what is the history of defense in Europe, our common defense, a possible common defense. As we all know, Europe was characterized by one single topic for centuries, and this was war. War between European entities. After the darkest period of our history, after World War II, there was a Europe emerging that up to today was the shining example worldwide for lasting peace and reconciliation. And it's really the example that peace and reconciliation, even after centuries of war, are possible and manageable. And therefore Europe turned to a continent of peace, of stability, of prosperity, of freedom. Nowadays, if we look at Europe, many countries are putting their strength together. We are pooling our strength, knowing that there is no single country, member state in Europe that is able to tackle the problems on its own. This goes for many topics. It goes for the common market we have. It goes for Schengen, for example. It goes for the whole topic of free movement in Europe. But strange enough, it doesn't go for defense. And for that, you have to look into the history. What happened after World War II? Europe started with the project of common defense in 1950. Then it completely failed in 1954. And then you had a long period of growing Europe where this topic of common defense was completely excluded. And of course, NATO stepped into that place and protected the Western world for more than 6 decades, reliable and courageous, without any doubt. Now, if we now look at the last 2 to 3 years, we saw all of a sudden horrendous challenges. First of all, European peace architecture was challenged by Russia. Second, we saw terror by Daesh, by ISIS, and that this terror is not only limited to the Near and Middle East, but is striking our Western society in the middle of their heart, in the center of our cities. We saw the refugee crisis that was almost tearing us apart. And there was the Brexit referendum. Right after the Brexit referendum, and we're still sad about it, about the outcome, it was us, the Ministers of Defense, who thought, let's start an initiative. We started with a French-German initiative on defense. We thought the time is the right time, because I must admit our British friends were constantly blocking defense in Europe, or the progress of defense in Europe. But I must admit, at the very beginning, there was a whole lot of skepticism and criticism and reluctance towards ideas of more common defense in Europe. Everybody was kind of thinking, it's not worth it in Europe. We can't get our act together. Then came the 8th of November 2016 and the American election. And it was phenomenal to see all of a sudden the whole atmosphere shifted for 180 degrees. And all of a sudden, we realized how important it is that Europe is earning its relevance in security and defense matters. You know that we heard things like NATO is obsolete. We were told that we, the Europeans, owe the United States money. Don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely convinced that this discussion is right, because it is a fair discussion about burden sharing, and it's fair to ask us Europeans whether we are carrying a right amount of burden on our shoulders or not, and I think we have to improve. But it was the tone in which the discussion was set that taught us that we better get our act together as Europeans. So Europe must be able to solve its own problems on its own. Nobody will help us. For example, if I look at our neighbor Africa, I do not see NATO in Africa, but I do see the European Union absolutely in Africa. It's our neighborhood. We have a vital interest that there is stability and development in Africa, for example. To be very clear on that point, it is in our interest to remain transatlantic, without any doubt, but to become more European. This is important in defense. Just a few facts. Together in Europe, we have the world's third largest armed forces. We spend significant amounts on defense. We have a unique comprehensive civil-military toolbox at our disposal, the so-called comprehensive approach. It is the European color. What does it mean? The comprehensive approach is you have military means, you have economic development means, and you have the political good government means, and all three of them are the right mixture to solve conflicts, but to be sustainable in building up survivable governments and flourishing economies at the place where the conflict was. However, we all have these tools, but we never ever put a frame around it so that Europe was never able to act consistently and speedy. For example, where was Europe in the Ebola crisis? We desperately needed Europe to act. It was not possible. We had single instruments, but we didn't have a frame to react. So every single country started. I called my French colleague. I asked him how many soldiers and hospital beds he's building up in the Ebola region, and we did the same. Each member state tried on its own to solve the crisis. Where was Europe at the beginning in Mali? Where was Europe when the Central African crisis hit? Where was Europe in fighting Daesh, ISIL at the very beginning, when the crisis hits? When a crisis hits, you can't debate 6, 8, 10 months before you react, but you need structures and decision procedures to move forward. So we always wanted to act, we didn't have the mechanisms, and therefore we were seen as a body, as a European Union, who is not really liable when a crisis is coming up. In short, the European Union must be quicker to take decisions and react. It must act effectively and improve the interaction between its civilian and its military tools, for example, as I said, in Africa. We adopted last year the European Global Strategy. This was the first step in the right direction. I highly welcome that yesterday the Commission has provided a paper on the future of the European defense. A so-called European Defense Union has finally arrived in our political arena as a crucial topic for our common European future. It's incredibly important. The paper is ambitious, this is good, and it supports the process we already started. Once again, in 2016, we started with the initiative, and I'll talk about it in a moment. Nobody wanted to join. Then things changed with the American election, and now in 2017, it's the year of implementation. All of a sudden, everybody is not asking about whether we need it, but how can we fulfill the tasks and the milestones we want to get to. What are the milestones? At the very beginning, yes, we have now a new military planning and conduct capability. MPCC is the horrible long name. To be honest, there is a British proverb that says, if something looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it is a duck. So you can think of if something looks like a headquarter, walks like a headquarter, quacks like a headquarter, it is a military planning and conduct capability. I hope you understand we are not supposed to use the other word, but it looks like, quacks like, walks like, and it is finally a MPCC. Besides the name, it is crucially important because it's for the very first time that all these precious tools we have in the civil toolbox and in the military toolbox are being combined in this MPCC and are being led in the external missions like in Mali in Central Africa from one hand, one place from Europe. Second, and this is the place or the tool we have to implement now, we need a frame around the European Defence Union. We call it PESCO, Permanent Structured Cooperation. And we are making progress now. We need the frame because, and we want a frame that is as inclusive as possible, but also as ambitious as possible. We need this frame because we want the political will that member states says, yes, we want the European Defence Union, and therefore we are committing ourselves into this PESCO to move forward with certain projects. Projects, of course, that have to be operational, but also projects like the European Medical Command, a European Logistic Hub, a common officers training, cyber, you just name it. Third point, we have to advance joint research and development, as well as defense procurement activities, and generate more synergies from using the results together. For that, we need the so-called European Defence Fund. I really welcome the Commission's proposal regarding the European Defence Fund. It could provide a significant contribution towards the strengthening of the common security and defence policy. We need more common funding and more common armament projects. We're going through the proposal now as member states, but I can tell you that in Germany already we know that the German finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, and me myself, we will particularly contribute to this European Defence Fund with ideas how to develop this. Of course we need the finance ministers because they know how to deal with the tool. We need money. But the defence ministers know what kind of projects we want in the European Defence Fund. For example, the Eurodrone. Put it in the European Defence Fund because no member state is able to develop it on its own. We need it desperately, so let's put it together in the European Defence Fund and develop and produce it. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, this is a short introduction to where we want to go. Once again, it is no competition to NATO. It is complementary. This is sometimes hard to understand, but as a German defense minister, being member in NATO and being member, of course, in the European Union, I know how it is to have this double hat on my head, but I have one single set of forces. So I know we have to get our act together as Europeans so that we can move when there is a crisis and we are needed. On the other hand, whatever we are doing is of benefit for NATO, because then we are a stronger European pillar within NATO. And we need both. We need NATO on certain fields, and we need the European Defence Union. A very good sign that NATO and the European Defence Union goes together is the fact that since a year or two, on the NATO ministerial meetings, we always have the High Commissioner, Federica Mogherini, sitting at the table, and vice versa. On the European Councils, we always have Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, sitting with us at the table and debating. This is the way it should be. I'm open for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Minister, for, as you said, an introduction, but a comprehensive introduction. I think an introduction with a vision. And now it's up to you for questions. So who would like to take the floor and use this opportunity? Please, the gentleman over.
Donc nous allons donc maintenant ouvrir le débat, prendre quelques questions. Je sais que vous devez nous quitter dans une dizaine de minutes, donc je vois votre staff d'ailleurs qui est très attentif. Bonjour, je représente l'Association pour les réfugiés de Bruxelles. Quelques mots peut-être. J'ai l'article ici devant moi, l'article 7. Alors je vais être un peu technique, mais l'article 7 dit que toutes les infrastructures et les actifs ne peuvent être mis en œuvre que par des sociétés qui font partie de l'Union européenne et qu'aucun État qui ne soit pas membre de l'Union européenne ne pourra intervenir dans toutes les activités liées notamment à la défense. Alors, cela veut dire que le Royaume-Uni sera totalement exclu. Je ne crois pas que ce soit envisageable si l'on veut défendre l'Europe. Comment envisagez-vous donc de résoudre ce problème? Oui. Alors, c'est vrai que pour des raisons de principe, le Royaume-Uni a bloqué l'évolution et la construction de la défense européenne. Donc, de fait, il n'y a jamais eu de contribution britannique à l'Union européenne en matière de défense. Donc il n'y a rien à séparer parce qu'il n'y a rien, entre guillemets. D'autre part, nous avons des liens extrêmement fiables, extrêmement forts avec le Royaume-Uni dans le cadre de l'OTAN. Nous coopérons avec le Royaume-Uni de manière excellente dans le cadre de l'OTAN, et cela va rester. Mon collègue, d'ailleurs, mon homologue, a signalé qu'il envisagerait à terme de participer à certaines missions en les choisissant, évidemment, mais évidemment, nous sommes dans une situation où, de toute façon, rien n'était, entre guillemets, commun, donc il n'y a rien à séparer. En ce qui concerne l'industrie de la défense, par contre, là, très honnêtement, je crois qu'il faut fonctionner comme nous le faisons systématiquement en matière industrielle. Si nous voulons développer ou acheter un équipement quelconque, eh bien, nous choisissons le meilleur équipement et nous l'achetons sur base, entre guillemets, du fonctionnement classique du marché avec la concurrence. Et là, tous les acteurs potentiels sont les bienvenus. Merci beaucoup. Vladimir Georgiev, Gerrit Schlumach et Carlos Costa-Nieves. Nous prendrons 2 questions et ensuite 2 autres questions. Merci beaucoup. Je suis membre du Parlement de Macédoine. J'ai donc voté en faveur de l'intervention, de nos interventions conjointes avec l'OTAN. Nous travaillons avec l'OTAN. Nous voulons continuer à collaborer avec les missions de l'OTAN. Et nous accueillons donc évidemment le fait que le Monténégro se joigne à l'OTAN, mais envisagez-vous d'ouvrir l'OTAN à d'autres pays comme la Macédoine en termes de membres, entre guillemets? Bon, ceci est une discussion qui n'était pas censée être une discussion sur l'OTAN, mais sur l'Union européenne. Mais oui, je dirais que de manière générale, et j'ai lu ce qu'a dit le secrétaire général de l'OTAN ces dernières journées, je crois qu'il est ouvert à l'idée, oui, même si vous connaissez la procédure, évidemment. Bonjour, Gerrit Schlumach. Je travaille pour Michael Gardner au Parlement européen. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre, pour vos efforts en faveur de cette Union européenne en matière de défense. Je me demandais comment vous allez pouvoir réconcilier les questions d'exclusivité et d'inclusivité quand on parle de politique européenne en matière de sécurité commune. Bon, il est clair, le traité prévoit 5 engagements qu'il faut donc respecter pour participer donc à cette politique européenne en matière de sécurité commune. Aujourd'hui, effectivement, nous voulons que le système soit aussi inclusif que possible, c'est-à-dire, dans le meilleur des cas, à 27, mais nous devons également être ambitieux. Et donc, il est possible, certainement, d'arriver à un équilibre sur base du respect de certains principes et de certains engagements, sans que cela n'implique automatiquement que tout le monde participe à tous les projets. Donc certains pourront peut-être aller plus loin que d'autres en participant et en s'engageant dans certains projets de manière plus intense, et participeront donc dans le cadre de cette politique commune à davantage d'activités et de projets que d'autres. Monsieur Costa-Neves. Merci. Merci, Madame la Ministre, pour vos remarques que je soutiens totalement. Je suis membre du Parlement portugais. J'aimerais savoir, quand on réfléchit à la règle de 2% du PNB dédié à la défense, que pensez-vous de tout cela du point de vue européen? Pensez-vous que cette règle doit être obligatoire et comment la rendre compatible avec le pacte de stabilité? Excellente question. 2%, pour ceux qui ne travaillent pas, entre guillemets, au quotidien en matière de défense, c'est l'objectif que l'OTAN a fixé pour ses membres. Et ce, à l'horizon 2025, donc au milieu de la décennie à venir. C'est évidemment une source de nombreux débats, dans mon pays notamment. Si l'on s'intéresse maintenant à la défense européenne, qui est extrêmement soutenue de mon pays, ne pensons certainement pas que ce sera meilleur marché. Si nous souhaitons être indépendants, efficaces, capables de gérer en tant qu'Européens notre propre système de défense, nous allons devoir investir davantage au niveau national dans la défense. C'est-à-dire que nos budgets de défense nationaux vont devoir augmenter. Aujourd'hui, c'est vrai que les Américains prennent en charge une grosse part du budget de l'OTAN. Donc n'essayons pas de tromper, entre guillemets, la population en disant une défense européenne nous coûtera moins cher que une défense basée sur l'OTAN et sur les 2% de contribution. Ensuite, le pacte de stabilité. Je crois au respect des règles. Et je crois que nous devons non seulement penser à ce que nous faisons ensemble en tant qu'Europe, mais nous devons également être compétitifs au niveau global, au niveau mondial, dans cette mondialisation dont nous parlions tout à l'heure. Et là, le pacte de stabilité est extrêmement important pour garantir cette compétitivité. Les dépenses en matière de défense ne peuvent pas être exclues du pacte de stabilité. Faute de quoi, nous remettons en cause totalement la stabilité. Et je crois que il n'y a pas de contradiction entre le respect des engagements au titre du pacte de stabilité et la mise en place d'un système européen de défense. Maintenant, tout le monde ne doit pas forcément contribuer au fonds pour la défense européenne. Ceux qui souhaitent financer certains projets, que ce soit voilà, la prochaine génération de tanks ou d'avions de chasse, pourront s'impliquer, pourront investir dans ce fonds européen et contribuer de manière volontaire, entre guillemets, à certains projets. Voilà. Merci. Nous avons une demande de parole ici. Et vous, monsieur, également. Oui. Et une question qui nous est parvenue par Facebook. Et nous avons 5 minutes. Je vous en prie, madame. Elisa Peri, je suis journaliste finlandaise. 2 questions. Quels seront, à votre avis, les pays qui vont justement prendre à bras-le-corps ce projet de développement d'une défense commune? Et voulez-vous que la Finlande soit un des chefs de file? L'Union européenne en matière de défense, c'est une prérogative de l'Union européenne. Point. Ce qui a changé l'an dernier, c'est ceci. Au début, je crois qu'il y avait beaucoup de scepticisme. Et ni les politiques, ni les citoyens, d'ailleurs, ne croyaient en l'Europe. Tout cela a changé de manière absolument dramatique, spectaculaire. Et je crois que nous pouvons aujourd'hui être efficaces et montrer que l'Europe est efficace quand elle agit là où entre guillemets, elle peut agir le mieux. Et je crois qu'il y a aujourd'hui beaucoup de mes collègues et beaucoup de citoyens qui veulent réfléchir à la manière dont on peut construire cette défense européenne. Ensuite, aux États membres qui le souhaitent de se joindre au mouvement. Et je serai aussi inclusif que possible. Si possible, nous devrions faire cela à 27. Une autre question finlandaise. Oui, vous êtes l'équipe finlandaise. Oui. Lors la discussion sur le cadre financier pluriannuel, il est possible qu'à cause du Brexit, on se retrouve finalement avec un budget européen moins conséquent. Si moins d'argent est disponible, d'où allez-vous tirer les fonds nécessaires pour...
The European budget. I'm pretty busy with the German defense budget, and I am an expert on. And secondly, this is the proposal of the Commission, and as you always know, these proposals will be met by complementary proposals by the member states. What I can talk about is what a member state like Germany is thinking about, and this is the principle of, here's the European Defense Fund. We have very interesting projects in it, and those who want to participate in specific projects, the Eurodrone, for example, or stuff like that, commit themselves to contribute. Important is one lead nation for a project, so that we have not the problem of A400M, where you have 5 or 6 different nations with 5 or 6 different type of airplane at the very end, but one type, therefore you need a lead. But it's up to the member state to invest. There is a strong incentive in the member states because we have one mechanism also we want to develop. This is a homogeneous planning process, looking at our deficits, and there are deficits. And therefore, if you want to keep up with the development of the European Defence Union with your armed forces, you have to keep up in investing in common weapon systems or armament procurement instruments, because otherwise the interoperability between the armed forces will be poor. So there's a strong incentive to develop something of the next generation, like a fighter jet, for example, together. First of all, it comes cheaper for each member state. There is economy of scales in it. And you know that at the very end, you're able to maneuver this fighter jet with 27 member states and not only with your own country, talking about surrounding infrastructure you need, pilots you need, technicians you need, and all these things that are necessary in it.
So then lastly, we have one question from Facebook, and I hand over to my colleague, Juha Pekka.
So is it on? We got a question through Facebook from Duarte Max from Portugal, a member of parliament, I believe, who is asking that, considering Germany's strong support for European defense, is Germany now ready to finally act and lead the member states also in foreign policy and international conflicts?
We are, if I may put it that way, it was the wonderful and is the wonderful European experience that it is good to lead from the center and to always move forward together. Of course, you need impulses that come from different points, but we think it is a very typical European color to have the way to convince all of us to move forward in the same direction. And the development of the last year shows that being a bit patient at the beginning with the proposals of the French-German initiative, and then taking the political momentum that occurred with the change in the White House, was the right way to go to take everybody along. We have been enriched by then added proposals by other member states. This is the strength of Europe too. So I don't think that these questions of leadership are always the right questions to ask, because the European character is a different one, a unique one, and I think we should really value and cherish it.
Dear Minister, thank you once again for sharing your vision on European defense. We discussed before we started this debate here that things are actually going very well at the moment. But in order that they keep going well also in the future, we also need your leadership, we need your support. So thank you very much for having been here. I don't want to be, and the EPP doesn't want to be responsible if you miss your flight tonight to Germany. So we wish you all the best, and thank you very much, and a big applause.
Thank you. Thank you.